Welcome to Biblio Cultist, where I review books that I find interesting from the topics of theology, history, philosophy, and fiction. It could be classic literature or even modern fiction if I find it interesting. Before we start on the video, please remember to subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Click the notification bell so you are aware when I put out new content. I tend to put one full review out every week and then about two or three shorts every week. You can also follow us on X if you wish to, and I really appreciate the support. So on this episode, I will review The Hanged God by Shani Oates. And this book, and before I go into the content, is by Anathema Publishing, and the edition that I have is a 2021 edition. It's a paperback edition. I do have her follow-up work from this one in a kind of limited edition version. Like I always say, it doesn't matter what you can find, what you can afford, as long as you can read the content and enjoy the content, that's what matters. So the one I have is the paperback, a very nice edition. Anathema Publishing does a really good job in creating the special editions and even the more accessible, financially accessible paperbacks. So going to The Hanged God, Odin Grimnir, which is the subtitle. So the book is a book of reconstruction, and what I mean by that is that in modern times, especially after the 60s and 70s, a huge amount of people decided to abandon Christianity or abandon traditional or kind of more normative forms of spirituality and start experimenting with new forms. And from that period forward, you do get a lot of the neo movement. So what I mean by that is the neo-Wicca, or although Wicca has its own category, to be fair, but as a term, but you would say neo-heathenry or neo-paganism. And the reason these terms are used is because a lot of these religions, unfortunately, don't have a link or lineage to the forebears that practice these religions. So almost everyone has to do some form of reconstruction if they want to practice any of these religions. And it's not only the case of Europeans. You see some of this reconstruction also even being done in Central America with the Aztecs and the Maya, etc. So it is a general movement to go back to certain folk religions, and if they're not alive or if they're dead, if you will, then an attempt to reconstruct them. So although this book is not on the topic of reconstruction, it's clearly a work that wishes to inform and educate people on the traditions and the way that northern heathenry in particular was practiced. And that's why as a book it's a great source for this. And I have a lot of books on that particular topic, not only of northern heathenry, but of all reconstruction attempts. I always find them very interesting. So going to a few of the points of the book, the first element that I found very interesting was the discussion of sacrifice. As some of you may know, Odin is well known as the Hanged God, thus the title of the work, because he placed himself, he sacrificed himself to himself, as the text says, to acquire the knowledge and the secret of the runes, which is the sacred language, the sacred magical writings of the Norse. And by doing this self-sacrifice, he was able to pierce the veil, metaphysically speaking, and gain secret knowledge, occult knowledge. So again, when it comes to the term occult, it just means hidden knowledge. So it applies to all religions at the end of the day, because if any religion has any information that is not easily accessible or as apparent, it is technically occult. So Odin, the hand god, for the sake of getting knowledge. Now, the practice of the hand god's religion involves sacrifices, animal sacrifices and human sacrifices. The most famous location for these sacrifices that most people are aware of is Uppsala, which is shown in movies and TV series. Uppsala shows up because it's a very well-known location of these sacrifices, including the more dramatic human sacrifices. Not the only culture that did human sacrifices, of course. I would say almost every culture has participated in some form or the other of human sacrifice. But I find the animal-human sacrifice component to be very interesting when it comes to the biblical point of view on sacrifices, the Vedic point of view on sacrifices, and the Egyptian point of view on sacrifices. The idea of giving sacrifice offerings to the gods or to God is a very ancient practice. And just like I don't like when I hear a person who belongs to the Abrahamic faith critiquing the pagan, so-called, for sacrifices. I don't like hearing the neo-heathens complaining about the Bible because they have sacrifices. It makes no sense because all systems had sacrifices. So there's not really anything that one has over the other, at least when it comes to sacrifices. I did find interesting that she, the author, placed in the work a reference about Inanna, which is a deity, a goddess from somewhere, Mesopotamia. And the reason is because she quotes Inanna as being suspended as dead by an iron hook for 3 days and nights. The purpose of the sacrifice is to win the sacred law. So obviously she places this on the book because it's a parallel. Whether or not it's connected, that's a different topic. I have books that speculate on this, but I'm just concentrating on this. And the reviews I give are spoiler-free as best as I can. I'm giving you, obviously, inside information of the work, but reading the book is really the key. The other point that I was very happy that she mentioned in the work is the Gnostic influence. The scholars have found evidence of Gnostic influence in Scandinavia. And I really appreciate she putting that in the work because a lot of people seem to be unaware of the deep, expanding influence of Gnosticism. And Gnosticism as a movement pre-existed Christianity. It has a few characteristics you could say are common. One of them is the iconographic nature of knowledge itself, Sophia in Greek. Knowledge itself is the heart of Gnosticism. That's thus the word Gnostic, gnosis, knowledge. But it also has certain components that you can see throughout different systems. The rejection of the material world as either being subjected to evil or fallen or impermanent or incomplete, etc. So there's different ways you can approach this, and that's the way that you can appreciate the diversity within the Gnostic movement. But a lot of Reconstructionists like to deny the influence of these things, so that's why I appreciate you putting it there, because Reconstructionists, to their credit. They want to be as pure as possible to remake a system. And therefore they have an inclination to disregard or ignore the influence of other systems, especially in the case of systems that are in contrast to Christianity, because their disdain for Christianity is usually the reason they wish to hop into pre-existing, pre-Christian form of spirituality. So when they go there, they tend to be very negatively inclined towards Christianity. So anything that smells like Christianity, they tend to reject. Even if it had some influence, they will still reject it. The sacrifice of criminals, or the sacrificial animals, as she mentions, they were primarily done as a necromantic method, meaning a way to be linked to the ancestors, to the dead, and to Odin in particular, by obligating him through the sacrifice. It's a little different than the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, for example, in which the purpose or the dynamic of the sacrifice is to pay a debt when it comes to sin and to the punishment due to sin, as the Catholics would say, or to exchange one sacrifice for other sacrifices. That's another way of seeing it. In the case of the Odin mythos, it's about obliging because of the relationship of Odin as a sacrifice god and the sacrifice being made, and the blood offering obligating the deity to respond and to be linked to the king making the sacrifice, the person doing the sacrifice. The other point that I found interesting, that Odin was not very popular throughout the Scandinavian milieu. He was primarily a Swedish, I would say, character or deity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just pointing out that this is what the book is basically claiming. And I am familiar with the fact that Thor was a lot more popular, for example. And in some areas, Freya, etc. So it is true that Odin was not that popular as people would imagine, being the head deity or the king of the gods, that kind of thing, which also is a change. A lot of people know that Tyr was the deity and then Odin kind of took his place. Very common thing that happens all over the place. It happens in the Vedas with Rudra and Vishnu, etc. So in Brahma. So you see that dynamic there as well, and you see it in other places. I would even argue that the Mashiach concept, the Messiah idea, Second Temple Judaism had a notion of two powers in heaven that were not as Unitarian as people think. And this second power in heaven would be a new king of the council of God, and he would sit on his right hand side and he would preside over the council, etc. And you see in the Messiah figure doing exactly that. In the case of the New Testament, he resurrects and then he rises and he sits on the right of his Father and he judges. But the point is that he is the king. He is crowned as king of heaven. So I'm not being too loose with the association that I'm making here between Tyr, Odin, and Jesus and Yahweh, but I think it's interesting to consider and to think about. Continuing the point, and Odin wasn't god of outlaws, so the outlaws felt a connection to Odin, and therefore you have the berserkers, etc. And it is a good point to remember. And then the final point, we'll kind of wrap it up, basically, which is that Odin, and she's quoting Joshua Rood, pointing out that Odin seemed to be a hybrid between a communal god, meaning a localized, tribal, particular deity, and a universal deity. So not fully universal, not fully communal. Universal deities would be, big G gods. And what I mean by big G gods is, deities that are applicable to all peoples, that are the creators of everything, of everyone, and that actually rule the entire universe. They're not only gods that rule particular regions or particular sections or particular groups of people, but deities that rule the entire universe. And what Joshua Rood, and being quoted here, is stating is that Odin, by being a hybrid of these two ideas of communal and universal, kind of led the way for the Christianization of the Scandinavians. Because, and this is me now, aside from the book, the Jesus figure seems to fit very nicely as a hybrid conception as well. Meaning you have the universal kind of distant deity who does exchange with people, but at the same time he is a universal God. But then you have the Jesus figure who is a personalized, because he's, has a human nature and a divine nature. This is obviously the Orthodox viewpoint, that he has two natures. So that human nature makes him what you would call localized or communal in a way. But at the same time, he represents a universal element as well. So by Odin being a hybrid that was not very common at the time, if he hadn't existed, basically Christianity wouldn't have been that easy to penetrate the minds and hearts of the people. This is a separate topic, though, because it is a controversial topic. Because you do have, obviously, evidence that Christianity imposed itself in very nasty means with swords and burnings, etc. But you also have some evidence that a lot of kings and a lot of aristocrats found it fairly comfortable and easy to convert to Christianity, to transition into Christianity from their heathen point of view. You even have archaeological finds of Thor's hammers with a Christ corpus on it, things like that. So that demonstrates that there's this transitional period in which they don't seem to have much of a problem combining these two. So, but anyway, that's a different topic. The point is, the book is wonderful because it delves into these kinds of things in a very interesting way. And, if you found things that I said interesting in regards to what the book is proposing, highly suggest you get it. Like I said, get it in any format you can find. And I think you will truly enjoy it. And I'll do other of her books. She's a really good author. I really enjoy her work. And she's not writing for an academic audience necessarily. She's writing for everyday people who are interested in the topics. So in that sense, it's a very accessible book. Again, thank you for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe. Again, click the bell if you're interested in getting notifications. Comment on the video, share the video if you have friends and family who are interested in this kind of book reviews. And I'll be more than happy if you comment for me to respond as well and engage in that fashion. So hopefully you enjoyed it. See you next time.